This is Glambition Radio, episode 299, When Women Lead, with Julia Boorstin.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Glambition Radio.
Glambition Radio.
Glambition Radio.
Glambition Radio.
Glambition Radio.
Glambition Radio.
Welcome to Glambition Radio. I am your host, Allie Brown. I'm an entrepreneur, mentor, investor, and founder of The Trust, the modern premier network for 7- and 8-figure women leaders. I love thinking big, doing different, and exploring ideas that disrupt the status quo, especially when it comes to women, because we are creating the new models for leadership, business success, making money, and changing the world. And hey, we're doing it with style. So let's go. Hello from Phoenix. I am here getting ready for our meeting this week for The Trust, which is my network for 7- and 8-figure women entrepreneurs. We have our best turnout ever. As far as RSVPs, we're getting all the arrangements ready. We're so excited for our special guest, Paige Adams-Geller, who is founder of Paige Denim, if you know the jeans and the clothing and the lifestyle. But there's so much more of a story behind why she does what she does. That's why I brought her in. And we're going to have closed doors, questions, spending the morning with her. So much to share. I can't wait to give you a debrief. But I want to keep today's message a bit brief because I'm running down to the event space right now. But that doesn't mean our episode today is no less than incredibly impactful. We got Julia Boorstin today, and she has spent over 2 decades as a TV reporter. You probably know her from CNBC. She's the one who created the Disruptor 50 franchise on that network. And what she's here today to talk about is, after all these years of interviewing business leader after business leader after business leader, there was such a lack of seeing women in positions of leadership that she really committed to, okay, how can we make this change? And she's got a new book out called When Women Lead, What They Achieve, Why They Succeed, and How We Can Learn from Them. And she has interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of incredible women founders and CEOs. Some we've had in our show, like Katrina Lake from Stitch Fix. Some I'd love to get on the show, like Gwyneth Paltrow. So have a listen. Make sure you pick up the book. Let me know what you think of the show on Instagram, and I'm going to go spend time with my members. So get ready for this fantastic conversation with Julia Boorstin. Julia, where are you today?
I am at home in Los Angeles. I live in the Hollywood Hills, and I've been going back and forth between my home studio. CNBC set up for me an amazing home studio with an HD camera and all the lights. I go back and forth between that and the Los Angeles bureau for CNBC, which is on the Universal lot.
So they've kind of kept that hybrid work environment in television, haven't they?
Yes. I mean, once they invested in building the studio for me at home, it looks so great. You can't tell where I am. And it's one of those things where they want us to be able to go back and forth. And I'm in the office a couple days a week. I love being in the bureau and having our amazing crew work the camera and the lights and all the things. So I don't have to worry about that. But there's a lot of flexibility. And I work East Coast hours. So I'm up tomorrow. I'm going to be on TV at 5 a.m. And it's really nice to not have to drive at 4 a.m. before you're on TV that early.
Oh, gosh. And be camera ready. I mean, that's the whole thing, right?
I have learned how to do my own hair and makeup. I have never straightened my hair before the pandemic. I have very curly hair. I have straight hair on TV, and
you were spoiled before. Then you had to YouTube it. You had to get training.
Yeah, I was so spoiled before, and now I have to be self-sufficient, which is actually really empowering. So I could do my own hair and makeup. It's really nice when I have the pro team do my hair and makeup. But on the days that I'm broadcasting from home, I can pull it off and get to save the commute time. I had
the same thing happen with speaking. And then also, even when I was ready to get back, you couldn't find people to come do hair and makeup for a while. They just weren't doing it. And I understood. So I, finally got some training, and now it's nice to have the choice. And when you get it done, it is such a treat then.
Yeah, it's so nice.
We're going to do a whole show on hair and makeup, camera ready, but next time.
I've got so many tricks.
Ooh, we may need a part 2 then with video. So much to talk about. I'm going to break this up kind of into 3 parts, Julia. And the first is I'd love to learn more of just a bit about you and everyone listening. They probably know you from TV, but to learn more about you and your background, kind of how you became the Julia Boorstin of today. And then I want to dive into, the idea for this book and how it happened. And then, everything that we've learned from it, and it could mesh together all this, but I'd love to learn more about you and how, you landed as the senior media and tech correspondent on CNBC and how that led to the book, just everything.
Well, what's so interesting is I've only had 2 jobs. I feel like that's the weirdest thing to say. I'm 43 years old. I graduated from college in 2000, and I've only had 2 jobs since then. The first year, 6 years after I graduated from college, I was a reporter for Fortune magazine. And then I switched over to TV full time, and I've been at CNBC since 2006, which is crazy. Wow. And I've had an amazing experience and career. And what's so sort of surprising is this idea that you could have only 2 jobs in this day and age when people move around so much. But I think one reason I've been able to stay at CNBC so long and just love my job so much is it is actually entrepreneurial. And I've created a couple of these franchises, which are so gratifying and so fun. And they both actually really connect to you, Ali, and your audience. And the first franchise, which I created, which is a real passion project of mine, is called Disruptor 50. So about 10 years ago, CNBC is very much focused on big public companies. And about 10 years ago, I thought, I'm so excited by these entrepreneurs. They are so fascinating and so innovative. And we need to be telling our viewers about these companies and their founders long before they go public. And this was right after Facebook went public. So I proposed doing this list that would take the startup landscape and put it into a language that our public company investors understand, which is basically like, these are the disruptors. These are the companies that are challenging the giants and are someday going to become the giants, the behemoths, publicly traded companies themselves. So I've been doing that list for over 10 years now, and it's now become this year-long celebration of innovation and disruptive thinking. And in the course of that, I've gotten to interview hundreds of fascinating CEOs. And it's one of my favorite things. I'm so inspired by entrepreneurs and how and when they decide to create this, their own thing and launch an innovative idea, and then how they execute it. It's so inspiring to me.
Yeah. I mean, really, when you look back in the last few decades, it is the entrepreneurs that have driven just so much of this change. And then when it comes to the women, what's your passion there?
Oh, yes. So that's the second thing I created at CNBC. So a couple of years ago, some female colleagues and I were saying, look, there are so few women in the business world. We need to do more, not just to highlight those women, but to highlight the companies and individuals that are working to close gender and diversity gaps. You may remember back around 2017, there was this whole movement of Time's Up and Me Too, and all the headlines were important, but they were negative. And there were a lot of people who were coming out and telling their stories of how they'd been treated badly and some horrific behavior in the workplace. While that was all necessary, I wanted to tell some of the positive stories. Instead of just shaming the men who had failed, I wanted to tell the positive stories of companies and people who were working to close the gender and diversity gaps, because of course it's the gender gaps that create environments that enable bad behavior to persist. So we started this franchise and we got to work trying to tell the stories of how companies like PayPal or Salesforce had eliminated not just pay gaps, but also promotion gaps, and how companies can really think differently about what it means to have equity. But my whole life, I've been, sort of inspired by female leaders, looking for role models myself. And when I was growing up, there weren't really female role models in business. I just didn't have any. And when I became a business reporter, I saw the sea of men and the couple of women, and I thought, wow, those women are so impressive to be able to defy the odds to get there. Why aren't there more of them? And what stories can I be telling to help explain how there isn't just one archetype of leadership? As well as I do, that when you talk about a CEO, the image that pops into people's heads is a guy in a suit on Wall Street or a guy in a hoodie in Silicon Valley. And that's the dominant archetype. And what I was seeing in my reporting is that that's just not true. Leaders look like all sorts of different things. And frankly, what I've seen in reporting this book is they lead in all sorts of different ways. And I'm so inspired by leaders, but we need to change the messaging of what it means or what it looks like to be a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. How many women did you interview? This list goes on and on here.
The list is going on and on. For the book, I interviewed about 120 people. The book features about 60 people, 65 women. But what actually led me to the book was my work at CNBC, because on one hand, I was doing the Disruptor 50 list, and I was interviewing all these amazing CEOs and founders of tech-driven companies. And then when I was working on the Closing the Gap coverage, I was looking at all this data about how crazy the gender gaps were. And the one that kept on getting to me was the stat that female founders draw 3% or less of all venture capital funding. Now, today, last year, it was 2%. It's never been more than 3%. And that stat is crazy. Yes, entrepreneurs have changed the world. Think about the way we travel with Airbnb or Uber. Every company that you can think of, whether it's Google or Facebook, all of these companies have been able to grow and succeed thanks to venture capital funding. And if 3% of that funding is going to female founders, then that's crazy. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, the stat that I kept on coming back to, and this is from last year. So this is much better than it was when I started reporting my book. Actually, this is from the first half of this year. First half of this year, 75% of all VC dollars went to all male founding teams. So
wow, still.
And then there was a chunk in there, a bigger chunk that goes to co-ed teams. And then the smallest piece goes to all female teams. But that's crazy. Like a team with not even a single woman on it. It was so crazy. So what I figured in doing all this reporting was the women who have succeeded despite those odds are by definition exceptional. If they have managed to succeed despite all these decks being stacked against them, I wanted to know how they did it. And I figured if I could tell their stories and I could figure out what their strategies were that enabled that success, then not only could I learn from them, but we could all learn from them. And even men would benefit from emulating their strategies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting time because I think coming to light, there's so many things I want to talk about here, but first, it was interesting. Before I even looked at your table of contents, my question I was going to ask you was, roughly what, of all these women combined, what percentage of them were coming from a place of fixing kind of the system, right? Fixing the industries they're in versus driving off the cliff, Thelma and Louise saying, see ya. You can't see the video, but I'm making a motion to Julia and breaking out of the matrix and blazing their own trail totally in a different way. And here you are, you actually broke up the book into the fixing problems, founders and CEOs, and then the creating new patterns. And actually, did you break up the people specifically or just the stories? Tell me about the decision to split that, because that's exactly how I was thinking.
Well, I think that's what female founders are doing. They're doing all of the above, right? And I think that there's so much opportunity for female founders, entrepreneurs to bring an outsider perspective to male-dominated industries and say, hey, you guys have been doing this the same way for forever, but maybe I understand female consumers better than you do. Maybe because I'm not part of the system, I could bring a fresh perspective. So I started off the book by just interviewing people. And I started by interviewing venture capital investors. And I would go to them and say, hey, who are the coolest, most surprising women you've backed? Who do you think I should talk to? And everyone I talked to sent me to talk to 10 more people. And I ended up just having these amazing conversations. Many of these conversations happened in the first couple months of the pandemic. And I think that's relevant because what was so interesting about that is everyone was stuck at home and everyone was thinking really hard about their lives and acting very vulnerable and open because we were all stuck in the same situation. Sort of, what are we doing with our lives? What is going on here? Mm-hmm. What does the future of the world need to look like? And I feel like I was very lucky in that, I was safe and home with my family during the pandemic, but also that there was this window to talk to people at a time when we understood the importance of connection and also the importance of trying to think differently about business and work. Mm-hmm. And the women I spoke to, and I saw men, but mostly women, were so open and honest with me about their challenges and the way they saw their world. There was one woman I talked to later, and I was asking her about a quote. She said, oh my God, I can't believe I told you that. That's so intimate. I'm so glad I opened up. But just this idea that we're, I got to report this out at a particularly intimate time for people to think.
It was a very a moment of humanity, right? There was no matter what kind of company people ran, whether you were selling widgets or services, right? As a leader, that was a very human moment for us, for your employees, for
we were all in it together.
Clients, customers, their families. Suddenly you realized how your work as a leader influenced your team's families, your customers' families, your clients' families. And so that's, in the end, that was a perfect time to talk with these people.
Totally. And also I think because everyone kind of got shaken up from the day-to-day, people had more time to really reflect about what drove them. That was a really interesting thing. Female founders are more likely to create purpose-driven companies, a company that cares about the environment or health or social issues. And statistically, female founders are just more likely to create them than male founders are. And also, interestingly, while women are face higher bars when it comes to raising money for companies in general, if they are launching a purpose-driven company, that sort of eliminates a layer of bias. And not that it makes it easier for them to raise money, but there was a fascinating study I cite in my book about how people sort of grade male and female founded companies the same if there's a purpose component. There are lots of advantages to having a purpose-driven company. I mean, talk about during the pandemic, it was easier to get people to power through and work hard when they're burnt out, when they know there's an additional purpose there. But the idea that not only are women more likely to do them, but these companies are more likely to be successful and that it makes it easier for them to raise venture capital funding is a really interesting angle there. But so back to your original question about how I divided up the book is I do think that a big chunk of the book, a couple of chapters are about how women are fixing systemic problems in business. The book is not organized around industry, but I do have one chapter just about retail because female founders have revolutionized the retail industry, particularly around fashion, unlike anything we've seen from male founders. And just looking at how women were able to say, I know what consumers want, and it is not what they're getting now. They want to have more choice. They want to be able to participate in a circular economy and buy luxury goods and sell them back. They want to have access to a stylist without having a gazillion dollars to pay for one, and just really sort of reframing the conversation because, if the vast majority of VC firms don't have female decision-making partners, they're putting money into companies that are familiar to them. And maybe they just don't understand exactly what the female consumer wants as well as a VC investor might, a female VC investor might. So there is this big component of the massive opportunity women have in being outsiders to established industries.
Yeah. When you think about everything you learned in this, and I'm sure that this could be like long conversation. What was for you personally, what was the biggest takeaway from talking with all these inspiring women?
It's really changed my life and the way I sort of go about my life in the world much more than I would have thought. I thought I was just telling their stories, and I wanted to get their stories out there. And then it became
like a reporter, right?
Yeah. And then it was like, and then I want to understand how they did it and find this academic research. I mean, I read 300 academic studies to find the 100 or so studies I included in the book explaining what these strategies are, why they work. And then in terms of the takeaways, there's so many takeaways and I write about them all. But the one that I think has impacted me the most is, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a founder. I'm risk averse. I've been in the same job for 16 years. And I always sort of assumed that there was something innate about these founders. I thought I was going to interview them and find out they came out of the womb, bossing around their friends and ready to run companies and making strategies and fully confident and ready to lead. And the one thing that was 100% true across all of these women, by the way, they're all lead differently. They have totally different personalities. Everyone is their own person, but there was one commonality. And that is that each of these women had to improve. And they might have had innate characteristics, things they loved. They might love public speaking. One might be an introvert. One might be great at building teams, but no one was born a great leader. They all had to figure out what their characteristics were, who they were. And once they really understood themselves, what they loved, what they hated, they could use that information to create benchmarks and push themselves to get better. And, I loved hearing from Sally Krawcheck about how much she hated talk force at the bank when she was a young executive. I loved hearing from an introvert like Shanlin Ma, who runs Zola, which is a wedding planning company. She is an introvert and she's figured out how to use that, her dislike of talking in meetings, as a massive advantage by getting other people to talk. I loved hearing from Gwyneth Paltrow about how She didn't think she was going to be a CEO at first. She didn't occur to her to ask for her board for that role. And all of these people had to say, okay, here's what I like. Here's what I'm good at, but I can always get better at it. And this idea that we're all a work in progress makes me feel so much more comfortable taking on risks and pushing myself because they all had to do it. No one is born great at anything, and we all can just push ourselves to improve.
Yeah. For women in general, and women's kind of my lane, I really can't compare it to men, but the hundreds of women that I've personally worked with, founding a business, running a business, leading a business is the biggest personal development test in the world. Like you pull out what you're made of and realize what you're not good at very, very quickly. Like it is the biggest shortcut to getting, clear on your strengths, clear on your weaknesses. And then what you're pointing out though, is having that agility and vulnerability to admit that and say, listen, here's where I know I am great and need to do this job. And here's where I need more support team or more people backing us up. But it's great for women to hear this because all of you listening, you think you have to do it all, right? You think that you have to be the idea person and the financial person and the marketing person and the salesperson, even in these smaller businesses, and I usually working with women who are in the 7 and 8 figure ranges. And even at those levels, your team's limited, your resources are limited, but you've got to get clear super fast. So where are those resources? Where do I need to pull in help? And where am I really good? So that's great to hear that even these women at these huge levels, some of these companies, many of them busted through $1 billion valuations.
Oh yeah.
The same thing's always going on in your mind, right? It's just more zeros, more people, bigger stakes.
The same thing's going on. But I think it's that humility of saying, look, like laying it bare. I'm really good at this. I've got this part down. Let me know if you think I need help on this, but I think I've got this. And then on the other stuff, like I'm not good at this. I know I need to get better. I am going to work to get better on this because I'm not going to be a good leader unless I figure out this category. And then the third category is I don't know what I'm doing here. I need to hire people. And there's so many great examples of this. But for instance, Katrina Lake, who founded Stitch Fix, and she didn't know anything about data science. So she actually said to me that she thought the fact that she knew so little about data science enabled her to hire better executives. She went on LinkedIn and she hired a senior data executive from Netflix, like top of the line. She hired someone.
She didn't mess around.
She didn't mess around, but she literally messaged them on LinkedIn and said, I don't know what I'm doing in this category. You are the expert in your field. Can you help me create a customer recommendation engine? Her humility about that and her honesty about how little she knew made people want to work with her. It made her a talent magnet because they knew that they would have room to grow. So I think there's so many different types of upside from that honesty and vulnerability because she said, please come work here. She hired someone from Walmart.com because she said, I don't know this world as much as you do. Please come help me. And together we'll be able to build this thing. And I think that the humility makes someone really attractive to work with because they know they're not going to be bossed around by someone who doesn't know as much as they do.
Yeah. Did anything really surprise you or shock you that you didn't see coming?
There are a couple of women in the book who originally did not think of themselves as CEOs. And I was shocked because you sort of think of all these big leaders as obviously successful and obviously capable of being a CEO. But, there's this woman named Jennifer Holmgren, who's the CEO of a company called LanzaTech. It's a crazy tech company. They create these microbiomes, little cells that I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but these cells digest pollution and, as she put it, poop out fuel. It's like magic. It's crazy. So they're transforming pollution to fuel. Has been in this industry for years. And she was working at a chemical company trying to deal with these solutions, create these solutions and create jet fuel. And when she got a call from a startup that was working on this, she said, oh, I can't be a CEO. I've never raised money. I don't know how to do that. And the idea that this woman who was 50 years old at the time or over 50 and total expert in her field would not know immediately that she could be a CEO and run that company. Or when I heard from Gwyneth Paltrow that it took her years before she asked the board for the CEO role.
Isn't that interesting?
That was really surprising to me that if Gwyneth Paltrow doesn't have the confidence to ask for the CEO role for years, then we all have to think about what's holding us back.
Yeah.
And ultimately she did. And she said that it was the most vulnerable she's ever felt. And she was really glad that she had to be the one to ask her board.
I didn't know she was CEO now because I may have met the previous CEO. Was it just recently, a few years ago?
She's been CEO for maybe the past 4 years or so.
Okay. Yeah. I had to take that in for a second because I'm like, wait, I know I met the CEO of Goop a few years ago.
So she had a CEO who'd come from Martha Stewart. She had two sort of quote unquote professional CEOs before, and then they were interviewing for another person. She was like, hey, nobody knows this business better than I do.
She raised her hand in the corner.
Yeah. But it was just surprising to me because I think of all these women as like constantly confident, never questioning themselves. And we all have our insecurities.
Yeah. Or maybe, and maybe someone like Gwyneth came, and you usually see the celebs start a business and usually they're never typically CEO, right? They bring in a CEO because they're she was the actress and the model or whatever she's doing.
But she has proven that model wrong.
Yeah. But then she knew, she's like, she watched them. She's like, I can do that. Yeah. And she probably knows how to follow her instincts quicker in that role. Right. And make quick decisions.
Yeah. And she knows the business. She's learned the business, but like talk about learning stuff you don't know. She talked about how at the beginning, when she was not the CEO, she would sit in conference rooms and she'd have her phone under the table, Googling acronyms. So whenever someone said an acronym she didn't know, she would Google it under the table, and she didn't want to admit that she didn't know all the lingo. She didn't go to business school.
Yeah.
But then at some point she was like, fuck it, I'm going to ask the questions. And she started asking the questions like, I don't understand exactly what you mean by that, or explain what that means for this. And everyone in the room was like, oh, thank God, someone is asking for clarity here. So the fact that she was vulnerable about her lack of expertise actually helped everyone learn from that.
Yeah, I love that. So is there going to be a part 2 to this book? Like, has this, you seem ignited by this whole process, and is this going to be a show? Like, I just have a feeling something else is percolating from this for you.
Oh, I would love that. Look, there are so many amazing female leaders. I could write 1,000 pages and still not cover all of them. But I don't know. I think that we need to get the message out there that, not only can women lead, but like what leadership looks like isn't the stereotype that we've been stuck with for the past 50 or 100 years. So I would love to write another book. I would love to turn it into any number of things, but I just find these people and the data supporting what they're doing so powerful.
Yeah, I love this. Well, let's talk about the book itself. Please tell everybody, where to get it, when it comes out. We're going to try to air this.
The book is called When Women Lead, and it's out from Avid Reader Press, Simon & Schuster, October 11th. You could buy it everywhere on Amazon, your local bookseller, your favorite book website. And we have an audio book, which I recorded, which was really fun, and a Kindle version. And of course, the hard copy is always great, but it's a great read. And I know that people will be so surprised and inspired by the women's stories that I write about, and also find the data and the research really valuable in terms of just everyday takeaways.
Well, Julie, this was fantastic. The last question I'd like to ask you is, a few pieces of advice from everything you've learned for all the women listening. If you could give maybe like just 3 off the cuff things that if this were like, your one moment to share some advice with all the women listening around the world, from your career, maybe combined with the information in the book, whatever you'd like to share. It's just a good last time to share with everyone.
Okay, let me see. I would say the first piece of advice, and this is one I really push myself to live by, and it's hard, is to do the hard things first. Have the uncomfortable conversations. Don't avoid discomfort. It's part of life. It's part of work. And the more you can be okay with doing the hard things and having the hard conversations, the more successful you'll be. Because those days when I send the tough email and get it out of the way, I know that I am a better journalist, a better mom, a better all of those things than waiting and saving that stuff for the last minute. So I try to sort of prioritize leaning into the discomfort and knowing it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. My second piece of advice is that not being confident all the time is actually a great thing. And I found in my book this idea that we're not supposed to actually be confident all the time. We'll be more successful if we know how to keep our confidence on a dial. Turn down your confidence when you're gathering information, when you're trying to figure out what to do, when you're a sort of like a data gathering mode. Then once you've made your decision based on all that data, that's when you should turn up your confidence and execute. But this idea that confidence can and should be on a dial is really reassuring for me because it means that when I'm feeling nervous or insecure, then I'm like, this is great. This means that this is the time when I should be gathering data, gathering information. And then when it's time for me to go do something, then I'm like, I did my work. Now I can be confident and execute. And then my third piece of advice is that we all have superpowers. and that thing that we love doing, we feel confident doing. And we should just all try to work to figure out what our thing is and then develop that and really build that out as something that we could feel great about. We were just talking about our kids, and we have little kids, and they talk about superheroes all the time. And the language of superpowers is something that's like really true for all of us. There's that thing that we love doing, and we should just find your thing and lean into it.
Yeah, I love that. Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for this book. I think it's just going to inspire so many women, and to get all those women in one place. I mean, I'm blown away. They must just, see your name and call you back. I don't know, but it's just pretty spectacular. So thank you for doing what you do. I think this was just the right book at exactly the right time, because coming out of the last few years, it was good in many ways, but it also, gave us a kind of a shakeup and a step back. And now I know so many women now are really ready to turn up the dial, like going into 2023. The last year or two, they kind of had to figure out their way. And now they're really ready now to turn up their dial. And I think this will really help them. So thank you, Julia.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Glambition Radio. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. Also, I'd love if you left us a review so more women like you can discover us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, and other major platforms. And I'd love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social. Instagram is my happy place lately, and that's Allie Brown Official, but you can find links to my other platforms at alliebrown.com. Glambition Radio is the elevated conversation for women leaders, and I'm honored you tuned in.